that look is because it's good morning from Antarctica. Yes, we're rolling down the ocean as I think today we do one more day of looking at the same icebergs and snow-covered mountains and such, and then we turn and head home. This would be day 5 of looking at those things. And I don't want to sound spoiled, but I've seen icebergs a couple of times in Alaska. I've seen colored icebergs, like beautiful shades of aquamarine blue, occasional orange ice from penguin guano, and I've seen a grizzly bear on this side of one of those glacier things. I've seen a few of those. I've seen sea lions. I've seen tufted puffins, all by way of saying, number one, I realize that I am horribly spoiled in my life, and number two, I'm slightly bored with a 16-day trip. Interesting concept. It allowed me to finish all of this writing and recording, and posting is, after all, the recording. But would I do it again? No. I would go to Alaska. I would go to Glacier Bay, which has all of this stuff in one compact place. But this has been interesting. I did see something new to me, and that is 20 to 30 foot swells in the ocean. Basically, waves. 20 to friggin' 30 feet! That was nuts. And more power to the captain and crew to keep us from frigging capsizing during that nightmare. Okay, enough background. Next section is careers. And I call it careers, plural, because I've had 5 or 6 adult jobs, and I'll get into reasons for the switches and all that kind of thing. Good news about careers and work prior to that, when I was younger, I only one time have had a job that I didn't enjoy. And that was after I retired from CFO services and became a CPA again. And I hadn't been for 20 years. And to coin a phrase, it sucked. I was so far behind on technology and tax law and etc. It was torturous. But I signed up for it with a brilliant guy named Rand Hansen, who seemed to know everything about everything. A lot of respect from me. But it sucked. This section will, I think, hardly touch on the Rand experiment and give you a point of view on everything else. Okay, some more bad news. The first recordings that you've listened to, if you've listened to this point, came to 20 pages in my memoir. And the careers are 18 pages, at the end of which I'll be half done with the whole thing. But it could take another 4 freaking hours to get there. And I will do my best to break those into half-an-hour segments for easy listening and looking. So, with all that said, here we go. I've always been... Oh, wait! One other thing. On the previous sessions, I was able to print out what I was going to be reading or discussing. I'm on the ship. I can't print out. By being able to print, I was able to keep my head up most of the time. Now I've got to kind of to look at the page as I'm talking. And that's the kind of shape my neck's in. When I look down, I'm getting more doctor's visits. Okay, careers, and I hope I'm starting now. I've always been a hunter, not a gatherer. And there are many ways of saying this. A starter, but not a runner. I've been wildly creative given my education, and I had certainly a reputation for that. Jobs. I was what's called a revenue agent for my first 3 years out of college at the IRS. And revenue agents audited small corporations and such, and large net worth individuals. So that's what I was doing. Right out of college, I went to New York City for 2 months of training. The local New Yorkers, one in particular, called myself and my buddies, but for some reason, mainly me, pig farmer, hog farmer. I heard that all the damn time. While in New York City, the Nebraskans used to go out on the weekends, of which we had, 7 or 8, at 2 in the morning and just wander around looking for nightmares, because we don't have those in Lincoln and Omaha. This one's classic. We get to New York City, and there were like me and a guy named Styles, not that Styles, Harry, different Styles. We were in a cab, and we were taken to Grand Central Station for a reason that eludes me, and then caught a different cab to the hotel. Well, we opened our doors, the cabbie opened the trunk, and a guy came over and asked us, okay, could I help you with your bags across the street to the cab? Well, we thought it was the cab driver, of course. So he takes him across the street. We give him a 20 for the effort. He drops him and frickin' takes off running. And the guy in the cab that we were gonna now take gets out shaking his head and goes, "New to town, boys? You just paid somebody $20 to take your luggage across the street. He's not driving you anywhere." Nice. And Carl Thornburg, Grandma Sherry or Mommy's dad, who I loved, from that day forward, pretty much, called me Rube. My IRS pay the first year was $10,507. I left 3 years later making a whopping $18,000. the IRS bastards had told me I would start at 14,000. And then they gave me this phony reason for why I started 10,507. And I had met all of the requirements to do 14. So that was a huge breach of trust and a huge difference in money at that point in my life. I hadn't been there very long, and I got in trouble. And the trouble was, my manager calls me in. He says, "We understand you've been taking work home at night." I said, "Yeah, not every night, but every week, certainly." And he says, "You have to stop that. You're getting paid for 40 hours a week, not something over it. And more importantly, you are being compared your job performance to everybody else at your level. And it's not fair for you to be able to produce more work because you work more hours, so quit it." Okay, so I'm like 3 months in, and I thought, well, I won't be here very long. And then just random IRS stories. I was really good working on criminals of various kinds. One was a woman who had refused to file tax returns for like 10 plus years. She lived at 72nd and West Maple, roughly. And I went over to her house because she wouldn't return a letter, she wouldn't return a call, and I went to knock on the door. I go knock on the door, nothing. So I start walking around the house, looking in the windows, beeping Tom. What do you know? There's my girl hiding behind a recliner. Like, I'm not gonna see her. And I'm screaming at her. Her name was Barbara something. "Barb, I can see you behind the chair. Get up." She totally refused, and she had to know I was there. I worked on a guy named Ed Maslonka in soon-to-be my home, Fremont. And Ed was he was a building contractor, home builder, really a remodeler. And he was working on what I still think may be the most beautiful house in Fremont. And when his client would write him a check, he would take that check, pay down his construction loan, but just kind of forget that he had to pay income tax on all those checks. So I went and audited him, and he got whacked with a civil fraud penalty. Set up all the income, it's $60,000, and the penalty for that was half of it, $30,000. So instead of owing 60, he owed 90. In addition, I did back then what are called jeopardy assessments. That's where the police have busted somebody, usually drug dealers, and they would have people come in and count the trash cans full of cash. I mean, it was not unusual to hit $1 million, and then my job was to help with that process and then write up the tax and the penalty that these people owed, which there was no way they were ever going to be able to pay. I was assigned a project to audit 6 bookies around the states. And that was interesting but difficult. And one gal, I had to hand it to her, was brilliant. We had their slips, their betting slips that they had written on. And so I had a handwriting analysis done where you actually observed them doing it. And this gal was right-handed and she wrote left-handed. So it didn't look anything like what we were finding on the slips of paper. About 6 months into that IRS job, I had a notification to audit a gal named Doris J. Witherspoon. And I called her listed home number. That's back in the day. I figured she was an old lady, given her first name Doris. Oh no. Doris Witherspoon was DJ Witherspoon, the founder of something called Pamida. And P-A-M-I-D-A, his 3 kids, first names. And he had hundreds of small town farm stores across Nebraska and surrounding states. He's the one who built that white mansion up on a hill in Regency. A well-known dude. So I'm auditing. I walk into, at that point, Deloitte and Touche's office, and they take me to a conference room. No exaggeration. There are 5 Deloitte Big 8 international firm partners in the room, dressed to the nines. Their suits were each worth more than my car. And they explained who DJ was and signed up. This was auditing a hunting lodge, obviously BS, trying to deduct everything related to it. And he signed up and I got out of there. It didn't take half an hour. I go back and ask my manager, who's this Doris J. Witherspoon that I just audited? And he about crapped. He goes, you aren't supposed to be talking to guys like him. He's part of a large case. And I hold up my signed agreement, and I said, isn't this what we're supposed to do? So eventually I resigned there. And reason is, I thought my life had just been threatened. Another thing that was hot back then were, sorry for all the sniffles, tax protesters, people who didn't believe that they had to pay tax at all. I go to a guy's house in South Omaha. Knock, knock. He opens the door. Walk into his living room. All around the living room, which was a nice-sized room and dining room, there are 4-foot by 6-foot oil paintings with this dude in them, like Moses with the 10 Commandments, but it's Jimmy John with the 10 Commandments, and I am creeping out. What am I walking into? And I sign him up as usual, UOX, and he says, when I die and I come into my kingdom, I will remember you. I was not happy. I go back to the office and I say, this bastard just threatened my life. And the old guys laughed. They said, shit, we've had guns pulled on us and knives and one thing or another. You rookies. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to get any backup on this, and I'm making $18,000 a year. At today's dollar, double it, 36. Still not enough to be happy with getting my life threatened and no help from back at the IRS. So I started looking for other places to work within a month and was immediately hired. On my way out the door, I got a $1,000, which is a big number compared to what we were making, sustained superior performance bonus from my manager in the IRS. My coworkers and Phil were stunned, given the fact they knew I was quitting, but I still get this check. The IRS started my public speaking career. 3 months after I was hired, I was told I was going to go to Offutt Air Force Base and train 200 people who have some knowledge of tax preparation for the VITA program, Voluntary Income Tax Assistance. And their mission was to go back to where they worked and lived and help prepare tax returns for people who didn't know how to do that. I had to talk for 2 days, 8 hours a day, on taxes, which, depending on how you do it, is the most boring thing you've ever seen, or just a little above boring. And I managed to get mine just a little above boring by telling jokes and using overheads on an overhead projector that, again, every one of you have never seen, probably never heard of. The joke I always started with, like dang near everywhere I went, was, I'm Catholic, and Catholics, like all of us, had to take a second language during high school. And the language I chose was Latin, because a lot of Catholic ceremonies and such are done in Latin. Okay? Now, Latin is a dead language. It's never used, so kind of a stupid decision. But it did have its usefulness. And that is, if you were in law or if you were in medicine, quite a few words come from Latin roots, like politics. Poly, meaning many, and ticks, meaning bloodsuckers. Trust me, that was always a hit. And let me see, my last thing on the IRS, because I was working fraud cases so regularly and doing quite a bit of driving to work my fraud cases, one day a thought came to me, and the thought was, if you filed your tax return on January 5th, say, like immediately when you could, you would get, I'm gonna screw this up, so give me just a second to think through it. Okay, you file on January 5th. You get a refund because you're such an early filer before January 31st. Now, employers didn't have to turn in their W-2 information till February 28th. And a thought popped into evil-minded Phil's brain, and the thought was, they have no idea what my W-2 is when I file it in terms of how much money I had made. Because I filed on January 5th with the W-2 my employer got me immediately after the end of the year. And they had no idea what was on that return, on that W-2 I filed until the end of February. Therefore, if a person could make up phony W-2s and file them on early January, you'd probably almost 100% certainly get your refund if you had one and you could set it up. That certainly you did. You'd get that refund in mid to late January, early February, before they knew that was a legitimate W-2 or not. So I'm driving down the road and I'm thinking, you know, if a guy did 1,000 of those phony returns in early January and got a $5,000 refund on each, how do you do that? Well, you say your income is $75,000 and they owe you a $5,000 refund at the end. Well, 1,000 times 5,000 sounded like $5 million. And folks, based on what I knew about how the IRS ran, that would freaking work. And you would not believe the depth I had. Come on in, Edwin. Hold on. Edwin, my cabin steward, is here. Hello, sir.
How are you, sir?
I'm well.
You have your breakfast already?
My who ready?
Do you have breakfast?
Oh, yes, I'm
Yeah.
skipping. Yeah.
We lost a little time in the fall.
I'm gonna take that one, sir.
Yeah. And I'm filming, so come on in.
Yes, sir.
In fact, it was on the borderline. You're going to
Okay,
fly by
back.
deception or just going straight.
That is Edwin, my cabin steward, who is marvelous. Look right here. There he is. So, one example. In the latter part of the year before I'd be filing, I would go around to a bazillion small towns. And I'd set up a post office box in each of those little towns. And I would have those tax refunds mailed to that post office box. Now, I had introduced myself to the bankers, and so, you know, when I came back, hey, good to see ya, I'd open that safe deposit box, take it over to the teller, and get my $5,000. And you could receive just short of $10,000 before they had to report to the IRS that they had given somebody cash. So that was the large part of the way the thing worked, but there are tons of details, and unfortunately, I didn't do that. And I say, unfortunately, when you're 20, 40 years old, an extra $5 million is tempting. Okay, I am at 29:47, 29 minutes, 47 seconds. And that's the end of IRS. My next one is on Sweet and Howland, a CPA firm that I joined, and we'll cut this off and start there.